up, everybody? Welcome back to From the Bottom. Today we have a very special guest. We got Sargent Qs coming on the show. Sargent Q. I do have to say early that y'all heard about me starting a business and stuff, but big thank you to him, behind the scenes, because I had to pick his brain on a lot of stuff, but he's way bigger than just a business owner. And today he's going to get into that about a serious topic, veteran, suicide prevention. He's very big into that. So, Aaron, I don't want to take up no more of the time talking. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and some of the stuff that you do.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Calvin. Thanks for letting me come on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with everybody, what we're doing out here to help battle, suicide. And so you'd mentioned, about my business. And so give people a little bit of background of who I am. I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps. I worked with a special forces unit called 1st Anglico. We're the Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. So we call in all the air, artillery, mortars, all that fun stuff. I was a master parachutist, naval weapons security manager. So I got to do a lot of fun stuff when I was in the Marines. But when I was in the service, I spent my last year in Iraq in 2003 during the initial invasion. And when I came home, I just came home. It was no big deal. But then I started having problems, man, some like nightmares and depression and anxiety, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And several years of dealing with that depression and anxiety and suicidal ideations, I almost committed suicide myself. But I was able to work through it, and God showed me an amazing way to heal from trauma. It's to serve other people. So I spent 7 years on the mission field, going all over the world, from Haiti to Honduras to Africa, Cambodia, Indonesia, Mexico, all over the place, serving God's people, building churches and schools and orphanages. And what God was teaching me is there's healing through serving others. And because I did that, I spent 7 years doing that. God called me to show other veterans that same healing. So I started an organization called Q Missions. We've won multiple awards from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And then a couple years ago, I was named Seattle's hometown hero for our program. And I just teach these guys the same thing that I learned, which is there's healing through serving others. And I just published a book. It's out right now on Amazon. It's called Healing Through Service. And it walks people through that step by step. It's everything that I teach the veterans in this award-winning program when I take them to Mexico. It's all laid out right there in the book. And we also created a video series that goes along with it. So if you read the book and you see value in it and you want to share it with a buddy, there's a way to do that through this online platform called Udemy, where you can go on and you guys can read the book and then go through the classes together. Like any other church small group, it operates just like that. That's how we built it out. So I want to get this information in the hands of people so they can start to overcome this trauma that they've experienced. Because the reality is, at some point in our life, the majority of us are going to experience a major trauma. And so I read a study, it said 61% of men in America, they admit to experiencing a mental health condition at some point in their life, a severe mental health issue, whether it be severe depression, anxiety, suicide, bipolar. At some point, 61% of men in America, they admit to having a major mental health issue. That's 61% admit it. So imagine how much of that goes unreported, that people who don't talk about it, people who don't say anything, they suffer in silence. And so knowing that, this book I think is timely because it helps people who maybe are afraid to say anything, that they can get this resource and start putting some of these skills in practice and figure out how the brain operates, so that way they can figure out how to overcome these mental health issues. And part of the problem is that people don't talk about it, right? It's so taboo. People are like, I don't want to talk about mental health. It freaks people out. And, I've been working in this field now. I've been suffering with PTSD for the last 12 to 13 years. But I've only recently been talking about it. So these last 3 or 4 years, I've been spending time helping other veterans. You know, I speak on large platforms. I wrote this book, and it's in the book, it talks about my own experience with mental health and those issues, and being afraid to talk about it because of the stigma around it. And so with all my work with veterans, I found out that there's really basically three camps when it comes to mental health. On the far left side, you have the victim mentality, people who think that nothing is ever their fault, it's always somebody else, you know, the world's out to get them. I'm sure as I'm saying these things, people are being like, oh yeah, I know a person like that. Like it's one, they live their life one catastrophe to the next, right? Like it's
Yeah.
one, it's always somebody else's fault. They got fired because their boss doesn't like them, or they know better than their boss, or it's always something, right? They take no personal responsibility. That's the victim mentality. And I know that mentality well because I lived there for a very long time. Okay, that was me feeling like the world owed me something because I went off and served in combat. And, you know, I grew up really poor as a kid and was homeless. And so I had this mentality that somebody just needed to take care of me, right? Like this entitlement for some reason, that victim mentality. And I lived there for a long time. On the far right side, we have another minority camp, which is the mental health deniers, the people who say things like, oh, you just need to get over it, or, you know, you just need to move on, or that person's faking it, or depression's not a real issue, you just need to snap out of it. So those are the mental health deniers. But in the middle, you have the majority camp, which is where most of us sit, is in this majority camp. People who are struggling with a mental health issue, but we're surviving, we're thriving. You know, I mean, I'm considered 100% disabled for PTSD from my time in combat, and I still run a successful business. I employ over 100 people here in the Puget Sound. I run an award-winning nonprofit, and I have a tech startup. But I still deal with depression on a regular basis. I have nightmares like crazy. During this COVID thing, that extra stress has caused my nightmares to flare back up, and I got to deal with that. You know, so there's mornings where I wake up and I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna make it today. You know, I get anxious, I get anxiety. I got anxiety getting ready for this meeting right here, which is crazy because you and me are friends, right?
Yeah.
And we're just talking, but I still had anxiety about it because I've got to tell people about my mental health issues, right? And I've got to talk about it. And even though I'm a huge PTSD advocate and I'm an ambassador, I still have that fear, right, of telling people and being judged, right? And
Yeah.
so people who are out there struggling with mental health, man, I just want to tell you, like, majority of us are struggling. It's okay. And it's okay to talk about it too. You know, nobody's going to judge you. And if they do, then that person's not really your friend. And there's a lot of us out here who want to support you and help you because we're struggling right along with you. So that's that silent majority. The problem is that we're silent, that we don't say anything. But what I've learned is that when we step forward and say, hey man, I'm struggling with mental health, but I'm surviving, it empowers both of those other groups, right? So it makes the people on the right who think that it's just a fake illness, that they think that these people are all malingerers and just need to get over it. It makes them rethink their idea of mental health because they look at me and say, well, Aaron, you struggle with these mental health issues, but you're so successful. You help all these people. So it changes what they think mental health looks like, right? Because
Yeah.
they expect it to be somebody who's just a burnout, you know,
Yeah.
not somebody like me who struggles on a daily basis, but I get through it. And it also gives the people on the left, the people who are really struggling, stuck in that victim mentality, it gives them hope that one day they can do better and be better as well. But the most important thing it does is it emboldens and empowers the silent majority to stand up and say, hey man, I'm struggling too. So let's get through this together. You know, and so that's what I'm here to do today, is to just try and empower other people who are struggling with mental health, who are having suicidal ideations, to empower you guys that there is help out there. You can get better. You can thrive, not just survive, but thrive with your mental health condition. So that's mainly what I want to main message I want to get out to people.
So
So,
I do got a question, two
yeah,
questions.
yeah, go ahead.
So like you said, when you came from war, did you just come right back like into civilization, or is it like, y'all get like a break, a period where you slowly try to readjust back to civilization, you know?
So, in an ideal world, that's how it would work, where you get this slow transition back in. And the military is doing a lot better now, putting people through transition classes and things like that to prepare them to get out. But not me. I went straight from the battlefield in Iraq to being on my front doorstep in 72 hours. So
Oh,
I flew back into San Diego. I turned in my weapon, most of my gear. Then they flew me up to Portland. I spent a night in Portland where they processed out all my paperwork on Swan Island. And then they gave me a train ticket. And I took the train from Portland up to Seattle, up to King Street. And then I was home.
whoa.
It was a very surreal feeling to, be walking around in the U.S. I almost felt like an alien, on a distant planet. It was a strange feeling to be back home.
And the second question I had pertaining to mental illness, do you think a lot of people don't talk about it because, in society, they consider that weak? If, you be like, oh, that's what you did. Oh, get over it. That's nothing. Like, really, that's, do you think a lot of people hold it in because it's considered like a weakness, to
Yeah,
talk about that type of stuff?
yeah, absolutely. You hit it right on the head right there, Calvin. That's exactly right. People look at it as a weakness because they don't really understand it. Because when you talk about a mental illness, you're talking about basically a mental wound. Okay. And so you can't see it. So it's hard for people to understand it if they can't see it. So how I try and compare it is to a physical wound. So a mental or emotional wound is just like a physical wound. So if I had a broken arm, you wouldn't be like, hey, Aaron, can you come over here and help me, move this couch? Because you see, I got a broken arm. Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't ask me to do that. You wouldn't expect me to perform at that level because you see that I have a physical wound, right?
Yeah.
Well, with a mental wound, people can't see it. So they expect people to perform at a normal level when sometimes they can't because that wound hasn't healed right. And so when we talk about like a physical wound and a mental wound, imagine for a moment that if you got a big gash on your arm or like a broken bone and there's an open wound, if you just covered that thing up and you didn't tell anybody about it, you just covered it up, it's going to start to get infected. It's not going to heal right. It's going to cause extra pain. And if somebody touches it by accident, you're going to have an adverse reaction like, oh, and you're going to, you might yell at them or swear at them because that hurt, right? It hurt you like,
But they don't know.
Because you covered up and you didn't tell them. The same thing with a mental and emotional wound. When people say something to us, it touches that wound that we have that's never healed, and it causes us to have an adverse reaction, an overreaction, usually. And people don't understand, like, why did they act that way? Because you didn't tell them that you struggle with that. And so that's our responsibility, is to let people know where we're at and where we're struggling. So I kind of give my wife a status report in the morning when I wake up, like, oh, I didn't sleep good last night. I just going to need a little extra space or a little extra grace or, stuff like that. Or if I'm in a store and I'm starting to have anxiety, I'm like, hey, sweetie, I'm starting to have some anxiety. So can we hurry this up, or can I just go wait out in the car? Things like that. I have to communicate with her, because if I didn't, I just held it in, and then she says something and then I blow up at her. She doesn't understand why. Right? So that communication piece is very, very important. So it's going back to the wound analogy. If we have a physical wound, we would, if I had gotten a gash, you would take me to the doctor, and the doctor would clean out the wound. I'd get professional help. They'd clean out the wound. They would bandage it up. I would tell people that I had a wound, and then it would start to heal, and I would go back in for regular checkups. And when it was healed, it wouldn't be painful anymore, but you'd probably still see a scar. There'd be a scar there, and you could tell the story, but it wouldn't be painful to the touch. It's the same thing with a mental or emotional wound. We have to go get professional help, go get counseling. There's nothing wrong with getting counseling. It's great because it helps you unpack those things and rewire your brain. So it helps you unpack those issues that you have, so that way that that part of that mental or emotional wound can heal. And once it heals, then you can tell the story, which becomes a testimony that you've healed from it. And now you can use that to lead other people to healing as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense right there.
Yeah, so I try and take something that we don't understand and compare it to something that we already know, which is like a physical wound. The other thing about it is crazy. It even goes deeper than that. So if we had a cut on our arm and it got infected, if you allow the infection to go long enough, it's going to start to damage the muscle and the tissue. And if we let it go even farther, we're going to get what's called septic, which is an infection in the blood. And once that blood infection reaches our heart, it kills us. We die from sepsis. It's the same thing with a mental or emotional wound. If we don't treat it, if we let it go untreated, it leads to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, drug and alcohol use, and that kills us.
Yeah.
So if we don't do treatment for a physical wound, it can end up killing us. It's the same thing with a mental and emotional wound. So that's how I try to explain it to people, to give them this big picture of kind of how mental health looks, is compare it to a physical wound.
So for you to start helping, you have started Operation Pop Smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give people more insight on exactly what that is?
That's great. So Operation Pop Smoke, and if people get to know me, they start to understand like everything I do is an operation. So I run my organization like a military unit. And so Operation Pop Smoke is a separate company, separate from my nonprofit. And so what I was doing is I was trying to find a way to communicate with the veterans that I was serving in my organization. And so I talked to a lot of other nonprofits that are out there, because there's a lot of guys out there doing good work, and we're all having the same problem. It's this communication piece. From the moment a veteran comes into our organization to when they start receiving benefit, like turning the corner and doing well, that can be days, weeks, months, or even years before they start turning that corner and doing better. Depends on how much work they put into it. And so during that time, it's a very volatile time, because they're usually trying to unpack trauma. They're trying to repair relationships that they've damaged. They're trying to, fix all these things that they've kind of muddled up in their life. And so it adds a lot of extra stress, and communication piece with them was really strained, really difficult. And so I talked to these other organizations to figure out what they were doing, and we were all having the same problem, is that how do we stay connected with a veteran that comes to us and they're in distress? How do we stay and follow up with them? And so I tried a few different things with like Facebook Messenger or like text message groups, but guys still weren't reaching out. I would have to reach out to them, and they'd say stuff like, "Oh, I've been struggling with this for a couple weeks." It's like, a couple weeks? Why didn't you call me? "Oh, I didn't want to be a bother," or "I know you're busy." And they had all these excuses why they didn't contact me. And so I looked at that. I looked at, stuff from the suicide hotline, why, basically their shortfalls, why the suicide hotline wasn't working. I looked at some studies done by the Department of the Army, where they tried to determine why we were so effective on the battlefield. And they narrowed it down to one single element, which is the squad. Because we fight in squads, every man values the squad over themselves. So they fight harder and longer because they don't want to let the squad down. So I was like, okay, suicide hotline is not working because when people call in, there's no personal connection with that operator. It's really difficult for that operator to try and build a connection with that person, especially in distress. So when I built this platform, it's a communication platform. It's a user-friendly platform for people to be able to, for veterans to be able to reach out when they're struggling with mental health. And so I did a ton of research into it. And so the way it's set up, it's a peer-to-peer group. So if I download the app, I get 2 or 3 of my buddies to download it. We're in the same group. So it's not a social network, it's a private network, a text messaging group. But there's a couple really cool components that we put in there. Knowing that they need that personal connection, we have them choose their own squad. So it's not like you can go on there and search for people or say, "Hey, I want to be an advocate for veterans." People have asked me about that, but the problem is there's no way for me to vet those individuals that come onto the platform. So you can only join a squad if you've been invited. So if I download the squad, or if I download the app, I choose the people I want. I send them an email or a text message with a link, and then they join my squad, and then we chat. Now, when we did the research on this, I was trying to find out why veterans don't reach out, or anybody, why they don't reach out when they're struggling with mental health. And what I found was that parts of the brain shut down when people are going through a mental health crisis. So their frontal cortex of their brain, the front part, frontal lobe, which has all their cognitive thought processing, that shuts down or is totally diminished when they're going through a mental health crisis. So their long-term planning, good decision-making skills, and their ability to overcome suicidal ideations or overcome impulses is not available to them. That part of the brain shuts down. And so when people have an impulse to commit suicide, they act on it because they didn't have the mental capacity to not do it. The same reason why they don't reach out. It's not that they don't want to reach out, they just don't have the capacity to do it. Who am I going to call? What's the phone number? What am I going to do? They don't have the mental capacity. So a couple things that we put into the app. Number one, if somebody's struggling, it's a single button push on their phone on the app. They just push the app for 3 seconds, and it automatically sends an alert out to their squad members that they're in distress. You know, a little alert will pop up on their phone telling them that their buddy's in distress. Now, the other important thing that it does is that it turns on their GPS feature. Because when we were using this in the early stages, when it was under development, people would push the button, but then they would stop responding. And we couldn't get a hold of them. We couldn't find them. We had no idea where they were at. So now, or they'd use drugs or alcohol and they couldn't tell us where they were at because they weren't coherent. So now when they push that button, it turns on their GPS feature. Now the squad can literally go find them wherever they're at. So those are the two important elements that we put into the app to make it be effective.
So I do got a question. So can somebody be in 2 squads on the app?
That's a great question. And so currently, no. Currently, it's OneManOneSquad. That is a component that's under development right now, but it's not in the app. But here in the next few months, it should be coming out. That's one of the components we want, because you know there's different tiers of leadership, right? So like in my organization, I have my leadership group, and they're in my squad, right? And so I have my 2 or 3 guys. But there may be a new member that comes in that wants me to be in their squad. So I'm going to support them, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to bring that person into my squad where my guys are at, because maybe they don't know them. So we're working on that right now with how to give people access to have multiple squads. So maybe they get support somewhere, but they give support somewhere else. But for right now, it's just one person, one squad.
And can they, so if they're currently in service, can they be a part of Operation Smoke now? Or is this for like people out of service?
So that's a great question. You know, if they're active duty, they can absolutely use it. Right now, because of this COVID issue, you know, we've seen suicide rates jump up quite dramatically. So right now it's free for anybody to use. So it's normally $1 a month to be on the platform. But right now it's totally free. So it's anybody who downloads it and uses it during this pandemic is totally free. And we won't, you know, we'll keep it free until we start getting some movement here in the country where everybody's opened up and things are starting to get back to normal. Then we'll go back to the charging platform. But for right now, I just want to be able to save lives and have people using it so that way they can, you know, have a tool out there that they can use that'll, you know, hopefully prevent suicide. So yeah, it's a great tool. It's so cool, in fact, that we had a healthcare group out of North Carolina contact us. They saw what we were doing. They loved the effects that we were having in the veteran community. So they asked us, they wanted to partner with us to build out a civilian version. Because right now, all of the terminology is very militaristic, because that's the demographic that I was, you know, focusing all my media toward was active duty and veterans. So we're in the process of building out with their clinical staff, building out a civilian version that'll be for everybody. And right in the middle of doing that, the healthcare hospital came to us and said, hey, we still want to do this project, but can we put a timeout on this really quick? And can we just get the current Operation Pop Smoke app the way that it is but have it built out for healthcare providers, because that's where we're seeing a really high spike in suicides right now, is in doctors and nurses and janitors and administrators that are dealing every day with this COVID crisis. And so we said, yep. So we shelved that for the time being, and we started reskinning our current app. And so that will be available in 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks, that one will come out for healthcare providers. And so, this healthcare company out of North Carolina, they've already agreed to purchasing a couple hundred of those apps, which probably will be up to 1,000 for their staff. And so that's what I'm going to target. As soon as that comes out, I'll talk to the different hospitals and healthcare providers here in the Puget Sound and down on the Oregon coast, showing them that we have this tool that they can give to their members to help overcome trauma and prevent suicide.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, because would they only be the invite only would still be the same, right?
Correct. Invite only is because what we want to do is we want to be sensitive to people's privacy, right? So there's no way to search for anybody on the platform. And the only way that somebody can join a squad is if they get an invite. So you can download it, but there's no way to search for anybody. You would have to send them an invite via email, and it's all done right there on the app. So you just put in their email or their phone number and you send it, and it sends the link, and then they join your squad, and then that's it. There's no other way to interact with people on the platform unless you receive an invite or send an invite.
So if it's over there on the East Coast, and say they send an invite to a nurse over here on the West Coast, would that nurse on the West Coast still be able to join?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yep, they can join whatever one. And so we want people to choose people for their squad that they know and trust, right? Because they already have that relationship. They already built up that trust. And so in the app, it's more than just a button you push and you're able to chat with people. So we teach people how to respond to a crisis. So a lot of times we don't know what to do, right? Like if somebody's feeling suicidal, I don't know what to do. What do we do? Well, I go back to my military training. And so we plan for everything. I don't just grab my guys and be like, all right, hey, we're going to go on patrol down here, to grid number 49, and we're going to, check stuff out and see what we can find. We don't do that. We plan for everything. I know my patrol route. I know my secondary route. I know where my friendlies are. I know where the enemy is supposed to be. I know what kind of assets I have available for fire support. So there's this whole planning that goes into it. So I took that same idea and I teach people to do that inside the app. So if we join a squad, if it's you and me and a couple other people, and we join a squad, we have to go through a training first, which teaches us how to build a plan. So we have an acronym, we call it AGE, because we want everybody to age, right, and not commit suicide. So AGE, we ask questions, we give hope, and we execute the plan. So ask questions. When somebody hits that button or you see somebody's in distress, we ask them, hey man, do you feel suicidal? Are you depressed? We have to be brave enough to ask those questions. And the person who's receiving the question, you've got to be brave enough to be honest and be like, yeah, man, I feel suicidal right now. That doesn't mean you're committing suicide in that moment, but I have that feeling. I feel suicidal, or I feel depressed, or I feel angry. It's okay to express that to people. So you ask the question so you know where people are at. The second part is you give hope. Hope is a powerful tool. And so you give them hope that, hey, you're not in this alone. We're going to get through this together. I'm here for you. That squad mentality. There was a study. So I'll tell you the story about hope. Hope is the most powerful tool that we have. They did this study in Johns Hopkins University back in the 50s. So it's the 1950s. Okay, you couldn't get away with this study now because there's all these animal rights groups and PETA. You'd be all over social media, right? They'd shut you down. But what they did is they wanted to determine which rat could swim better, the domesticated rat or the wild rat. And so they brought these rats in and they put them in these big jars of water and they let them swim around, and they would time them to see how long it would take them to drown. And the rats, it didn't matter if they were domesticated or wild, it only took about 2 minutes. The rat would nose around the edge of the container, would nose around, and he would realize that there was no escape. And so he would dive down to the bottom and drown himself. And the scientists were baffled. They're like, why would they do that? Why would they just give up? We know these rats are great swimmers, but after 2 minutes, they just give up and die. And so they weren't satisfied with the results. So as good scientists, they went back to the drawing board and figured out what parameter could they change to see what results they could get. And so they brought new rats in and they put them in those same jars and they let them swim around for a couple minutes until they realized there was no way to get out. And then those rats would dive down to the bottom again. But this time when they dove down to the bottom to drown themselves, the scientists would rescue them out. And they would hold them for a few minutes and they would pet them and let them rest and recover. Then they would take that same rat and put him right back into that glass jar. Now, something remarkable happened. That rat that was just saved from drowning would swim for hours and sometimes even days before his body physically succumbed to exhaustion and died. And at the end of the experiment, the scientists concluded this, that in the absence of hopelessness, the rats did not die. You see, by injecting that small piece of hope into the rat's life that there was rescue, he would swim for hours and even days before his body physically gave up. So we do that same thing. We inject that same bit of hope into somebody's life when they push that button and their squad answers up and says, hey, Calvin, how you doing today, man? I'm here with you, you know? We get through this together. You're giving them that same hope, and they're going to fight harder and longer to stay alive because they don't want to let the squad down. And so we ask questions, we give hope because hope is a powerful tool. And then the third thing we do is we execute the plan. And most people don't plan, you know, in their daily lives, and they definitely don't plan to handle a mental health emergency or a suicidal ideation. So we teach them how to build a plan. We don't tell them what needs to be in the plan, but we tell them how to build it because it's going to be different for everybody because everybody's a unique individual. So a great example that I have from my own life is we had a veteran who was feeling suicidal, but he was really only suicidal when he was drinking heavily. And so we said, hey man, you need to quit drinking, right? Like we told him that. But then we told him, like, look, the next time that you're suicidal, we're gonna and you're inebriated, we're gonna take you and you're gonna do this 30-day inpatient treatment. That's what we're gonna do. And we all agreed on it. He agreed on it. The rest of the squad agreed on it. Yeah. And sure enough, the next time he pushed that button and he was feeling suicidal, we said, hey brother, we all talked about this. We have a bed ready for you. We're going to put you in this inpatient treatment, get you to kick this alcohol addiction, and we think that's going to help you with your suicidal ideations. And he didn't want to go. He was resistant, like, no, I don't want to do that. I said, look, we all agreed, right? Like this is what was going to happen. So we're just going to execute this plan. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I agreed to that. So he went, and the guy's doing phenomenal now, doing great. But that's part of the planning, right? And so for each person is going to be a little bit different. For each squad, that plan will be different, but they have to create one. So we teach them, you know, the different elements to put into that plan. So that way, when that emergency happens, nobody's looking around like, what do we do? Who do we call? I don't know. You just execute the plan. The plan is right there. You just execute the plan.
I think that's phenomenal. I think that's phenomenal what you know, for you to come up with that vision in order to help the veterans, you know, with the suicide prevention. That's pretty remarkable.
Oh, thank you, Calvin. I actually can't take any credit for it. To be completely honest, I was praying about it one night where I was just really struggling to help these veterans. I'm like, God, why did you call me to do this? Like, I don't know how to do this. I am not equipped for this. I don't know what to do. I was just crying out to the Lord, like, I'm lost. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know how to help these guys. And the next morning I woke up and I went to go do my Bible study, and I had these visions in my head of this app and all the components that needed to be in it. But I didn't even understand all the components that needed to be in it. I saw them kind of like how you're looking through photos, right? Like a still frame. And if you go to our Pop Smoke page or our YouTube channel, you'll see there's a 3-minute video that we put out, which is a PSA. It's a 3-minute PSA that shows a veteran going through his day, you know, from the time he wakes up to the time he has a mental health crisis, and everything that he does along his daily route and all the different elements that are part of that. And that's what I saw. That's what God showed me, was each of these elements that needed to be in it. And each of the elements that's in the video, it shows the problem and then how the app overcomes it, right? The problem and how the app I can be honest with you. I didn't see the whole vision until after we filmed this PSA. And then I got to watch the video for the first time because I knew what all the elements were. I'd done the storyboard, I wrote the script, I directed it. The guys over at Knox Studio, they're the ones who filmed it for me. But once we got done producing it, I sat back and watched it for the first time, and I was like, wow. I couldn't see it when I was seeing just one little image, but when I saw the whole thing, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I was shocked. I was like, that's really good. But I honestly can't really take any credit for it. Only credit I can take is for being obedient to the calling God gave me and to the vision He gave me for this app. So I got a high school education, man. I barely know how to use my phone. I was struggling just to get on this Zoom call, right? Like, I'm not a technology guy.
You sound like me. I was struggling too. I was like, I hope he figured this out because I don't know if I can help him.
But I'm just obedient to what God tells me. It's a door opens and I just walk through it. I was just doing what I was doing. I was helping veterans, and I got a call from this hospital, say, hey man, we see what you're doing. Like, this is amazing. Can you come out and teach us? And I was like, me? Like, you know who I am? Like, I'm the janitor, bro. Like, that's what I do. I'm the janitor. And you're asking me to go in front of these mental health professionals, directors of the hospital, right? Yeah. Directors that are part of their innovation team, people who have master's degrees and PhDs in mental health. Like, you're asking me to come and explain this to them and teach them. I'm like, okay. And so I went and I showed them what we did, and I gave a presentation, and they said, man, this is amazing. Yeah, we want to partner with you. Like, let's sign a deal right now to build this out for everybody. And I was just sitting back like, okay.
That part's remarkable. Well, I had to get you on in order to share that, but I do have a feeling that this will not be the last time, because the knowledge you just gave a lot of people and the hope, that stuff is, that's what I like to have on the show and stuff. So,
yeah, man, I would come back anytime. I enjoy doing these events and these podcasts. These are great. So anytime I can get out there and share with people, the hope that where they're at right now isn't where they're always going to be. There's a small bit of information that could come in that could change your life forever. I just did a video, and I can't remember the Bible verse off the top of my head, but there's a video that I just produced. I was doing a Bible study, and It was the story of when Paul and Silas were in prison, and there was a big earthquake, and all the chains were broken and the doors were opened, and then the jailer wakes up and he looks around. He's like, whoa, he sees all the chains broken and the doors open, and he's terrified. He thinks, oh, everybody escaped. So he draws his sword and he's getting ready to commit suicide. He's getting ready to kill himself. And Paul yells out to him. He says, don't hurt yourself. We're all still here. Nobody has escaped. And the guy came in, grabbed the lamp and came in and saw that everybody was there. And he was so relieved. He fell down at the feet of Paul and Silas and he prayed out loud. And he said, what do I need to do to be saved? And so he accepted salvation right there. That night, it says that he led his entire family to the Lord, and they were all baptized that night. So if that jailer had actually committed suicide, none of that would have happened. Because he waited just for a few moments more, he got a new piece of information that changed not just his life, but it changed the trajectory of his entire family lineage, because his entire family became Christians and were baptized that night. So that's my encouragement to anybody listening right now who is struggling, who's dealing with mental health, and you feel like you're alone. You're not alone. And where you're at right now is not where you're always going to be. You know, you have to keep fighting, because that little bit of information, that new information that comes in, can drastically change the trajectory of your life forever. I went from being homeless, alcoholic, to being a business owner, the founder of an award-winning nonprofit, and creating a suicide prevention tool that is literally saving lives. I did all of that in 10 years. If I had committed suicide, I would have never been able to affect all those people.
You got that right.
So that's my encouragement to you guys, is that things will get better. You know, you will get through this piece. You'll have ups and downs. It's never going to be easy, but it'll be worth it. So.
And so for people who want to find you on social media, or how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so the best way, there's Q Missions is my ministry page. You can find me there. If you want to know more about the book and more about healing through service, you can look up Sargent Q, so SGT space Q, and that on Facebook, and you'll find me there. You can find the book on Amazon, Healing Through Service. If you look up OperationPopSmoke.com, that'll give you the suicide prevention app. Or you just Google me. You just Google Aaron Quinones or Sargent Q. Tons of stuff is going to pop up. I'm not hard to find.
He's really Googleable. He's Googleable.
Yeah, Google me, bro.
Thank you again for coming on. I usually do a motivational quote at the end. Do you want to give a motivational quote? Do you want me to give it?
No, I want you to give it. I've been talking a lot. I like to hear.
So
I'd like to hear from the cowboy.
This one, yeah, I'm gonna have to put that clip out. This one is like a veteran motivational quote. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us.
Yeah, man.
You know, and before I let you go, we always like to ask our guests if they can give our our ending saying before they leave. And our ending saying is Callan J. Day Ka.
Okay. So it's Callan Day Day Ka.
Callan J. Day Ka. Like that.
Yep. Okay. All right. This is Callan Day Day.
J. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna have to have you on again.
All right, brother.
All
right. Be blessed.
All right. Well, I hope y'all learned something right there. Like I said, ain't no telling who y'all gonna have on. I learned a lot. Suicide prevention is a very important thing, especially with veterans, especially with everybody. So, if you need more information, go find Sargent Q. He's Googleable, and you'll be able to find him out there. So thank you again for tuning in from the bottom. Cal and Jay, we out.